You want to know how a quiet suburb can turn into the set of a real-life thriller? Well, let me tell you, the day I saw a gun aimed at my deaf son in our own front yard, it felt like time just froze, every detail burning into my memory, my mind screaming, how did it come to this? I'm Daniel Carter, single dad to a 14-year-old boy named Dylan who's been deaf since birth, but sees and feels more than most folks with perfect hearing ever will. We moved to Laurel Park Meadows for the promise of peace for that slice of American normalcy you see in those real estate ads. But what we got, thanks to the HOA queen pin next door, was a whole lot more drama than we ever bargained for. See, Dylan's got this knack for reading people. He's tuned in, almost psychic, about moods and intentions even if the world's silent to him. He's always been my pride, this kid who signed stories with his hands and filled the house with laughter without ever saying a word. One morning, just a regular Saturday, he'd stepped out to check on his little herb garden chalk, still dusting his fingers from the swirls and suns he'd drawn on the sidewalk. You know, normal kid stuff, except in Laurel Park Meadows. Normal depends on who's watching. That's where Karen Williams enters the picture, platinum bob clipboard clutched like it's an extension of her arm, marching through the neighborhood with all the authority of a self-declared sheriff. She caught me the very first week wagging a finger at some oil stains in the driveway, telling me in this icy sweet voice that HOA rules require a pristine appearance. I thought she was just particular, maybe a little lonely, but you know what I mean. Some folks don't want peace, they want control, and if you're different, well, you're a target. Now, maybe it was Dylan's sign language, maybe the way we laughed without always waving, but Karen had us in her crosshairs. It started small, nasty looks. Photos snapped with her phone comments about vandalism when Dylan colored the sidewalk, even though the chalk washed away with the first rain. I tried to brush it off, telling Dylan that some people just aren't built for compassion, that he wasn't doing anything wrong. But then the notices started: fines for a chipped fence for trash cans, out an hour late for disturbing the peace when Dylan practiced on his nearly silent drum pad with his headphones glowing in time to the beat. Karen wasn't just annoyed, she was obsessed, hovering outside at odd hours, looking for reasons to make us outsiders. One night she banged on our door, ranting about noise and respect, threatening serious action if I didn't rein in my boy. The kicker. She stormed off before I could even explain that his drumming barely made a sound. Let me back up a sec. This wasn't just some cranky neighbor with a stick up her you-know-what. This was someone who felt entitled to police everyone, and that kind of power in the wrong hands is a ticking bomb. And that bomb went off one Tuesday afternoon as suddenly as a summer storm. I was inside sending work emails, trusting that Laurel Park Meadows was still the kind of place where your kid could water the herbs alone. Then Dylan burst through the front door, face ghost white hands shaking as he signed that Karen had pulled a gun on him, accused him of trespassing on common property when he was nowhere near her side of the fence. For a split second, I couldn't move. My world just tilted. I locked Dylan inside and sprinted out, praying it wasn't true. There she was, standing by the hedge pistol, gleaming in her hand, wild-eyed and furious. "Your boy was violating HOA regulations," she shrieked, waving that gun at me now. "These deaf kids think they can ignore everyone. I won't be ignored." Every muscle in my body wanted to tackle her, but my brain screamed, "Don't move too fast. Don't make it worse." I begged her to lower the gun, told her Dylan couldn't hear her threats, that she was scaring him half to death. Just then, Mr. Gilmore, old kind, the sort of neighbor you wish you had poked his head out, taking in the scene, eyes wide with fear. Karen snapped at him, telling him to stay out of it. My hands went up slow and steady, my heart threatening to burst. I managed to pull out my phone and dial 911, voice tight with panic, praying the cops would get there before something terrible happened. Karen just laughed, said the police would side with her because she was protecting the community. That's when things turned truly cinematic. Sirens in the distance, neighbors' curtains twitching, cell phones raised as everyone caught the show. Suddenly there's a helicopter overhead, red and blue lights flashing down the street, cops flooding the yard. They shouted, "Drop the weapon," but Karen just clung tighter, ranting about rules and intruders. It was like she'd lost all grip on reality, the HOA bylaws blurring with the law of the land. Finally, one officer rushed her as she stared at the helicopter, tackled her, sent the gun spinning across the grass. Neighbors let out a breath as if we'd all been holding it for years. Dylan, peering through the window, signed to me, "Is it over?" and I managed to reassure him. Karen, still fighting, kept sputtering about trespassing as she was cuffed and led to the squad car. That's when the tears hit me fierce and hot. We were lucky no one had been shot. Lucky the police had come in time. After that, it was a blur. Statements to the cops. News trucks rolling up my phone, buzzing nonstop. Karen's arrest broke the dam suddenly. Everyone had a story about how she'd threatened or bullied them over garden gnomes, children's toys, you name it. Turns out she'd been doing this for years, using the HOA as her personal fiefdom. But this time, with a gun pointed at a deaf kid, it was different. She was held without bail pending a psychiatric evaluation. The HOA rushed out a note saying she was stripped of her duties, a small victory, but honestly, it felt hollow. Detectives wanted every detail. Did I think Karen's hatred of us was about Dylan's deafness? Did I see the signs I told them about the chalk incident, the petty fines, the threats? They listened, nodding, saying this was the pattern, harassment escalating until someone finally drew a line, and the neighborhood changed almost overnight. People we'd never talked to brought casseroles, fixed our fence, asked if we were okay. Mr. Gilmore invited Dylan to his garden. Paula, the neighbor who'd shouted at Karen to put the gun down, organized a block cleanup, insisted we repaint our fence together. For the first time, Laurel Park Meadows felt like a real community, not just a cluster of houses under one tyrant's thumb. When the trial came, I won't lie, I was nervous as hell. Dylan more so. He dreaded testifying, but knew he had to. The prosecutor walked the jury through it all, the 911 call, cell phone footage of Karen screaming and waving the gun, the string of fines and warnings. Karen's lawyer tried to paint her as just scared, said she never intended to shoot. But when Dylan took the stand with the interpreter by his side and signed that he was only watering his herbs that he tried to explain he couldn't hear, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even the defense couldn't spin away the video evidence, neighbors' statements, the fact that Dylan had his hands up, terrified, and never posed a threat. It took the jury 3 hours to come back guilty on every count. Karen didn't even look at us as she was sentenced to prison plus counseling, the judge making it crystal clear that her so-called authority was no excuse for violence. When it was all over, Dylan and I stepped out into the sun, the weight of months finally lifting. What happened next still surprises me. The HOA elected new board members, promising inclusion over intimidation. Neighbors started a sign language program so Dylan and others could communicate better. People who once avoided us now learned to sign hello, offered help, built gardens, painted fences. Even the local news did a follow-up, not for more scandal, but to highlight how a community can heal after being held hostage by one person's prejudice. But the story didn't end in the courtroom. One day a detective showed up to say the youth center wanted to honor Dylan's courage. He hesitated, didn't want to be called a hero. But I told him real bravery is pushing forward when you're terrified. At the ceremony, he stood up and signed to the crowd saying no one should be scared in their own neighborhood because they're different. That's what makes us stronger, not weaker. The applause was thunderous, and I realized that in a weird, twisted way, Karen's cruelty had brought out the best in all of us. Now, months later, Dylan and I walk the block and see kids laughing. Neighbors chatting fences bright with fresh paint. He waves at friends in sign, even shares his story on social media to encourage other deaf kids to stand up for themselves. When we pass the spot where Karen once aimed that gun, he squeezes my hand and signs, "She can't hurt us now." I tell him that's right, buddy. Not ever again. So yeah, this is America too. Sometimes justice rolls in with sirens and helicopters. Sometimes it's as quiet as a neighbor's casserole or a kid learning to sign hello. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Do you think HOAs have too much power? Or is this just a case of one bad apple? Let me know down below. I bet this story stirs up some opinions about justice, community, and what it really means to belong.